Day adventures. Today I'm going to be talking to you about a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I want to talk to you guys about imagination. Essentially, I want to talk about the worries and the concerns for a lack of an imagination, and how I encourage both GMs and players to use their imagination more, or to let their players use their imagination more, and to allow more unusual things into their games, or to try and talk to your GM about allowing unusual things in the game, unusual combinations, or just a weird idea that you had or you put together. I want to encourage all that in general. And I want to talk about and I want to warn about the signs of players that have a lack of imagination, and I want to try to avoid more players having a lack of imagination, but at the same time to try and have patience for those players or even those GMs that have a sad lack of imagination. And so, just to start things off, I want to talk about this guy that I knew that used to paint miniatures, and he was pretty good at painting these miniatures, and he was he did a really good job when he wanted to. He had his good days and his bad days, and on his bad days, his miniatures looked very bad, and on his good days, his miniatures looked very elite. It was all about motivation for him, and I think that's a cool thing that he had the ability to even paint as good as he did. But he was held back by a restriction that I thought was very odd. And so, to give an example of this is of what this restriction was, he used to come to his friends to ask for inspiration on what to paint. He would also ask us if we wanted miniatures, because he was willing to buy miniatures and paint them for us. He would give them to us, and then there was also the option that I didn't just want to take for free all the time, and I tried offering to pay for some miniatures sometimes, but we never got to. I think I got 3 miniatures from him in total, my entire time of knowing him, before our things happened and our relationship essentially ended. And in these 3 miniatures, I got 3 completely different stages of his painting experiences. I got one where he really didn't want to paint what I was asking him to paint, and so it was very bad quality. And I got one where he was actually motivated to paint the miniature, and he was trying to show off, and so he painted it really amazingly. And then I got one that was downright in the middle, where he was kind of meh, and it looked meh. But to move on, to get on to the part about how he had how this was kind of a lack of imagination, was that so he would ask us what to paint and what miniatures to paint and stuff like that, and he would give us a big portfolio of stuff to look through, essentially, of miniatures that he would be willing to buy, and so on and so forth. There was this miniature of a character in a plague mask and a wide brim hat and a long trench coat, and had a bunch of alchemical items on him and stuff. And he was a really cool looking character, and I said, that one, I want you to paint that one for me. And then I started to explain how I wanted it to be painted, what colors, where, and so on and so forth. And he actually stopped me in the middle of that and told me, hold on, you know this is a plague bearer, right? And this confused me, because I didn't think that the name of the figure meant anything, because I thought this was a character for me to be able to play however I wanted. And so I brought that up. I brought up how, this is a character that I want to play, and this is how I envision my character looking. And he said, well, it's a plague bearer. It's going to be painted like this, because this is what plague bearers look like. And so I got frustrated, and I ended up backing out of the project, because I didn't want a figure that wasn't going to be painted my way. And this worried me and concerned me, and we ended up having a long discussion on this, because I thought to myself, what if what if he showed me a dragon that was called a blue dragon, and I wanted him to paint it red, because I needed a red dragon for my game, and so I wanted him to paint the dragon red, and so that way I'd have a red dragon. Would he do it? I was very concerned that he wouldn't do it because it was called a blue dragon. It had to be painted blue. And I didn't like that he was so held back by his lack of imagination that he couldn't even conceive the idea of painting a miniature in a different way than its name insisted. And so I want to avoid things like that. I want to avoid you guys being like that. I want you guys to be willing to think outside the box and not be forced to paint or color in something the way that you think it's supposed to be, and just do it the way that you want it to be. An example of thinking outside the box and kind of players that you should reward is I was in a game where I was trying to play a gambit like character, essentially a character that would throw playing cards, and I had this really cool idea. I put together a class combination that would work really well with it. The only thing that I couldn't figure out without changing the rules was the playing cards. There was no playing cards that you could use as weapons, and so I asked my GM, could I treat playing cards like shuriken if I increase the gold cost of the cards? Because this made sense, because shurikens are sold in stacks of 5, playing cards are sold in stacks of 52. So it only makes sense that you should definitely increase the cost of a deck of playing cards to fit that as 52 shuriken or more, because you're being able to buy 50 stacks of 52 are being sold in locations all over the place instead of stacks of 10. And my GM agreed with me, and he allowed me to buy a stack of cards and treat them as shuriken, which allowed me to not only have the damage of a shuriken, the range of a shuriken, but also treat them as monk weapons, because I was going to throw them with flurry of blows. And so it was all around a good combination. And we went through those restrictions, and I treated them like weapons, and I improved. I made masterwork ones, and we went down all the rules for shuriken for the cards, and we increased the cost of them, and it worked. And so yeah, this was just a little example of how you could think outside the box, and how I encourage you guys to think. I encourage you guys to try and think of how to change things in the game to benefit your character idea, so that way you can play the way that you want to play and still have a lot of fun. And I encourage GMs to allow your characters, your players, to come to you and make requests like this, and actually work with them. If you are worried about whether or not something is a little unbalanced or something like that, try to find a way to work with them to balance it out and to make it more appealing to both you and them. Another example is that there were a couple more examples I have of characters that lacked imaginations and characters that strived on imaginations. And one of the players that I had that strived on imagination, he was wanting to play a Leshy. A Leshy is a little plant-like character, a little plant-like race that are usually used as druid familiars, but he wanted to play as a Leshy himself, and that I allowed, which was already allowing imagination to strive. I allowed him to play a unique race species that was not like an actual race in the book, and so we had to use these custom rules that I was taught by a GM before me on how to play monster races. But also he wanted to have this Staff of Light, and one of the abilities that he wanted the Staff of Light to have was that he wanted to make it so that way when he created light with it, he could have it grow a large fruit and have it detached from the staff, and the fruit would emanate the light. And I thought this was a great idea. I didn't see anything wrong with this. Normally, you're able to cast light on something and have it go any way it wants. He wanted it to be restricted to producing it off of a fruit from the staff. And so I thought it was a great idea, and I allowed it. Now, an example of a character who lacked imagination. I do apologize. I am currently sick. So my voice may sound weird. But a character that lacked imagination, that was worrisome, was we were playing a game of Mutants and Masterminds, 3rd edition, I believe. And Mutants and Masterminds, I think, is a phenomenal system. It is like the perfect roleplay system, in my opinion. Well, at least very close to it, because you can build anything you want with that system. You could do Gundams with that system. You could do spellcasters. You could do superheroes and villains like it's meant to be. Or you can do very mundane things with it and just have all these abilities restrictive and on certain criterias to fit exactly what you want it to be. It's so open, and it's so unique of a system that you could play it any way you want. I love it. But apparently it was too much freedom for some players that I had, and one of my players, he was so unable to create a character with the system that he just wanted to play a pre-made character from the book. And I didn't like that. I didn't like him playing a pre-made character. I was saddened by it, because I wanted to see these really cool, unique things that my players could come up with. I wanted to see how my players could use this system to build whatever they wanted to make. And he didn't want to do that. He wanted to play a pre-made character, and not because he liked the pre-made character, but because he didn't have the imagination to put his ideas to paper. And so what I did with him is that I worked with him, and I essentially built a character for him, but talking to him, because he was a huge fan of Cthulhu and Cthulhian lore and stuff like that. And so I worked with him, and I talked to him and talked about abilities and stuff like that, and I used the system, and I essentially built for him a wizard that was very close to the wizard pre-made character that he was going to play, except that we changed the abilities to fit Cthulhian lore more, and the abilities to summon Cthulhian creatures to fight for him, and special attacks that had like Cthulhian arms and tentacles coming out of portals to attack for him. And he ended up really, really liking it and really enjoying it, and he played it, and it worked out for the best. But like, this is something that you might have to do for your players if you're a GM, is that, for one, you're probably going to know the system better than they are, because you've been reading up on the books and you've been prepping characters and NPCs with it this entire time, that you might actually have to work with your players that are probably too new to it, or it might just be too much for them, and that you need to create characters for them in a way. You need to work with them and help them and create a character while working with them, and essentially create a character for them to play, for them to get used to it until they are more comfortable with the system, or more comfortable with their imagination to be able to make decisions more on their own. And so that is something that you might have to do. Now, some other concerns that I had, some other examples that I want you guys to try to avoid, is that I ran into a player, or a GM, that loved, he apparently really enjoyed GMing, so much so that he could not get through one campaign without wanting to start over on another one, which is a problem that you should try to avoid having. If you like GMing a game, try to avoid stimulating your imagination with too many other things, because then you're going to want to be like, if you end up starting a campaign based on Lord of the Rings, and then you end up watching the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and next thing you know, you want to make a pirate-themed game, try to avoid doing stuff like that, because it gets very taxing on your players to constantly keep restarting just because you've lost inspiration and you want to do something different. But the real problem is that this player only was able to GM with books. And what I mean by that is that he was only able to GM book campaigns, pre-made campaigns, which is not entirely a bad thing if you are incapable of imagining your own ideas and your own stories and quests, and you want to just do book ideas and do campaigns from books. That's all right. But I encourage you to roll with the punches more, to be able to meet and play with your players on a equal playing field, because your players, to have 4 or more people in your game that are trying to create their own stories and play to their own strengths while also trying to complete your story progression is a bit of a challenge, and there's going to be deviations from the original story idea. You're going to have these side quests that are going to pop up out of nowhere that were not in the book, because they are goals that your players have for themselves. And I want you to not be restrictive on that. I want you to not say no to them on these things, and to ignore them just because you can't handle it. Try to get outside your comfort zone. Try to do new things to try and play. Try doing this additional goal that they have, and essentially work with them, play with them, and then try to make it link back to the story, the main core story that you're playing. Try to make it relate to the main story if you can, or if you can't, just have them do their goal with them, and then come back to the main story. Because you shouldn't say no to players just because you can't, just because it's not in the book. If you're going to be a GM, I highly encourage you to get to know your imagination and to use your imagination as much as possible, because you're going to be in a role that needs to be able to make stuff up on the spot, and needs to be able to roll the punches, to roll with whatever the players end up doing, and to stir it up and feed it back to them. And so I ended up having a GM that was not capable of doing that. If it wasn't in the book, he just didn't know how to handle it. And so what ended up happening in this game is that he wanted to do this one campaign, and I asked him if I could play a gunslinger, and he said yes. And I said, all right, I only want to do this though if you're going to change all the loot, so that way I end up still getting ammo, because I can't magically make ammo on the spot wherever I am without a lot of ingredients that I'd have to go fetch for and stuff like that. And being able to fetch for ingredients is not always available, especially in certain stories where you're not going back to town or something like that a lot. And he said that he would put ammo in the loot, and that he would consider a gunslinger when changing the loot for us. But suddenly, session after session after session, and there was no sign of any ammo or any gunslinger loot whatsoever. And I was starting to get concerned and worried, because I was running dangerously low on the ammo that I was able to buy at the start of the game. And I just couldn't find a way to keep fighting. Without ammo, I was turning into a pseudo fighter. I ended up having to do. Ironically, he was allowing me my imagination to run wild on non-gunslinger related stuff, such as I ended up having to build weapons out of the bones of the enemies that I killed. I ended up building swords and daggers, and he just treated them as fragile versions of the original weapons that they're based off of. And I ended up making a bunch of throwing daggers and a bunch of normal daggers and a bunch of I made a whip and stuff like that. And I had to resort to these weapons because he would not give me ammo, and he would not change the loot for ammo. I had to start getting permission to do stuff in the game to give myself a way to fight again. And this is something that your players shouldn't have to do. You should be able to roll with the punches and to change up the loot so that way it accommodates them, and to change up how the game is going to accommodate their characters and what their characters are and how their characters are being played. And another example of where he could not deviate from the book and he couldn't be original or use his imagination was when he had the big bad guy appear on us and he started to spew a monologue. And my character and me as a player was stressed because this is the big bad guy. I'm on very few ammunition that I've been saving for very special occasions, and I didn't know if this was supposed to be a small fight or if he's going to summon creatures for us to fight, and this is supposed to be a challenging combat for us or not. I'm in no position to do that, and so I started to talk. I started to engage the villain, and I was letting my bravado speak for me. I was cocking off. I was mocking the villain, and I was trying to roleplay to give ourselves more of a psychological advantage in this combat, or to try and confuse the villain in some way, or just something. I was just trying to feel stronger than I was in that scenario before combat started, and I ended up being stuck fighting with daggers made of bone. And he got so frustrated with me trying to roleplay with this character when this character was supposed to be reading off from this book's monologue that he actually yelled at me to shut up. And that upset me because, one, I was trying to roleplay. Two, I was trying to roleplay with the restrictions that he was putting on me because of his lack of imagination. And then I didn't like being yelled at to begin with. So these are things that you should try to avoid as a player, as a GM. Try to avoid a lack of imagination. Try to encourage imagination when you see it. When you have players come up to you asking you if something can work a different way, to be changed to work a different way, or if this could do this or that or could that, try to encourage it, try to work with it, try to understand it and accept it, because that stuff should be rewarded. That stuff should be 100% rewarded gameplay because it is unique and people are using their imagination, and it should be encouraged to keep happening because it's going to keep your game feeling fresh and original all the time because there's all these cool original ideas coming out. And you should avoid allowing yourself to be restrained by your lack of imagination. Try to branch out. Try to use new rules like my house rules or other people's house rules, your players' house rules that they bring to them. Try to use them. Try them out. And but I do encourage you to also don't let your players get ahead of you. If you feel you cannot control something, like you don't have a way to keep a rule in control. So like, for an example, there was a game I was in. There's been 3 games I've been in where my GM allowed us to play monster races. And out of all 3 of them, one of them couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle allowing us to play these monster races, and he couldn't handle the house rule that I asked him to let me play. And so essentially what ended up happening was he allowed us to play these monster races, but he couldn't handle the effects and the play style that came with it. And he started to change how rules worked and bent rules to his will and broke rules to his will, and not in good ways. Essentially, he was removing things that as players we knew to be truths and made them into falsehoods. He essentially changed them to work his way instead, and he was changing them on the spot to work in his way because he couldn't handle how these characters were playing and how these rule systems were working. And that is not okay. It is okay to change and bend the rules for your game, but don't bend and break these rules just to have it work your way all the time, because your players are going to get frustrated, because there's rules in the book for a reason. It's that way the players know how something works, and the GM knows how something works. It's okay to bend and change the stuff at the start and to explain to your players why you're changing it, but to change it on the spot constantly because it's not working the way that you want it to be, because something's not working the way you want it to be, that is not okay. And your players are going to get extremely frustrated because stuff that they're planning on, stuff that they plan to work a certain way, is not going to work that way for them, and everything that they did, built their characters in a certain way, took feats or abilities or skills that they did for the purpose of them working in this way, aren't going to work that way, and they're going to feel like they wasted their entire character on an idea that didn't work the way that they planned on it working. So I encourage you to try to use imagination as much as possible, but also to know when you're beat, and to don't be afraid to admit to your players, I can't handle this anymore, can we go back and change how this rule works? But don't do it all the time. Don't just do it on the spot. Don't just change it willy-nilly. Talk to your players, work with your players. They are as much part of this game as you are. You as a GM, you may be in a very important piece, putting these things together, putting this world together, and putting this story together, but they're just as much telling the story as you are. They're working on it, they're playing on it, and they're changing things just as much as you, and it should be a group collaborative to play your game, and you should work together as much as possible to change things and to make things and to use imagination. And so I hope that I've gotten through to some people. I hope that I've encouraged more imagination and more people to try new things. And I hope that you guys do try new things. I really hope you do. And I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Come back to this video. Tell me new things that you tried. Tell me how things went. If you have problems, go ahead, drop in one of my live streams. Ask me. I'll do my best to help as much as I can. Otherwise, yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you guys have a safe adventure. Have a good one.